Consecration of Emperor Napoleon and the Coronation of Empress Josephine by Jacques-Louis David. My name is Caitlin Gavin, and this is my art appreciation final project. So this is the coronation. It depicts Emperor Napoleon crowning his Empress Josephine in front of Pope Pius VII and his royal court. So before we get way too far into just tearing this massive painting apart, I think that there's a story to tell. We want to go back and look at how Jacques-Louis David came all the way to meet Napoleon and make this incredible painting through history and a massive French Revolution. This is Jacques-Louis David. This is a quote that he came out with that I really liked. It says, "To achieve their goal, masterpieces must charm, but also penetrate the soul and make a deep impression on the mind that is similar to reality. Therefore, the artist must have studied all the motives of mankind, and he must know nature thoroughly. In short, he must be a philosopher." I really like this piece because it states that he's not just a painter. He is a philosopher and a revolutionary. As you can see, he is intentionally, in this self-portrait, depicted in his revolutionary garb. An interesting little side note, as you can see this picture, he seems to be looking straight at you, but he also seems to be hiding his cheek, which wouldn't be evident unless you knew that he was actually in an accident at a young age, a fencing accident, which left him with an unhealing wound on his cheek, which turned into a benign sort of tumor. It would forever give him a speech impediment, so it rendered him a bit soft-spoken. That's not to say that he was not outspoken, because he was, and you'll find out. Again, this is just probably a caricature of this, speech impediment, this physical deformity. I think it was more on his cheek versus in the front of his mouth, but it does show you a bit of what he was dealing with. Alright, on to his education. This is Francois Boucher. He is the head painter to the king. Because he's the first painter to the king, has some luxuries that a lot of other painters do not. He has an unlimited unlimited supply of resources from the king. He has the privilege and luxury of having his own style. And as we will see in this next slide, he is known for his style of just frivolous sexuality. So this is his next page. He has a bit of a smirk on his face, which I kind of like, because he is the first painter of the king. He can paint whatever he likes. So this is the style that he would work in. This is what we know as more of the Rococo era. It's very feminine, it's very leaned back, it's very laissez-faire, not very serious, and lighter colors. Here's another example of his frivolous sexuality. See little cupids down there. And more importantly, he was also first painter to Madame Pompadour, who was the mistress to the king, and somehow worked her way into the kingdom in a way that she was allowed by the king, by the queen, and everyone. Yes, she was. Alright, so just to go into some of the Rococo architecture and just give you a better idea of what this is about. As you can see here, everything is very gilded, it's very fancy. It's just an era of elegance and grandeur, as well as ineptitude in the aristocracy. Here's another example, really, the swing. Again, these pastel colors, it's very delicate, very light-hearted feeling. Again, that angular light coming through. Here again, Germany was also a very big fan, like France, of this Rococo architecture. As you can see, the big Ionic pillars, very feminine. Again, the Hall of Mirrors. So something that we want to get into is, although Francois Boucher was the king's first painter, it was also important that, this Rococo era was his time. This was his era. This was his style, and he was also really old, and so although he did take on Jacques-Louis David, he wasn't sure that he would have the energy and spontaneity to really keep up and take on a whole new pupil, and or if he even really wanted to take on the new era of classicism. So what he does is he transfers Jacques-Louis David to his friend Joseph Marie Vienne. Now, Joseph Marie Vienne was not what I would consider a very talented painter in comparison to Francois Boucher. He was the main artist to the Academy, so he worked for the courts, for the aristocracy. He worked for everyone under the king, basically. And because he worked for the Academy, he developed many different styles. And I think that, because of all these commissions, it's hard to really pin down a Vienne style. For example, here you have the Greek women at the bath, much more of a Rococo style, that same angular look. And then moving on, we have much more of a classicist form. But we will say that what Joseph Marie Vienne lacked in perhaps talent or skill as a painter, he made it for in connections with people. So he takes on Jacques-Louis David, and they work together. He takes him on as his pupil, and eventually, it did take some doing, but eventually Jacques-Louis David wins his Prix de Rome and is considered an artist. He's doing it, right? So he's working on it, and all the while, France is in an uproar. They're in the middle of a revolution. Shit is hitting the fan. Excuse my language. And Jacques-Louis David is a main player in this revolution. He is teamed up with Robespierre, who is something of a madman during this revolution, who is just executing people right and left. They also teamed up with Jean-Paul Marat, who is a journalist, but a very intense one. He's basically going around and finding people who are loyalists, who are not for the revolution, and bringing lists to Robespierre and basically murdering people. So France is really just in the middle of a very unstable, polarized, chaotic era, if you will, movement, if you will. So this is one of the pieces that Jacques-Louis David, as he matured in his painting, he pulled out. He's studying at the Academy, he's looking at other artists, he's figuring out how to be himself, but also recognizing that he is part of this polarized environment and how to work through that in his art. So what we have here is the Oath of Hortai, and what's depicted by Jacques-Louis David in this picture is 3 Roman soldiers swearing an oath to their father to go invade another city that has basically wronged their government. Within that city and in the army that they will be invading is their brother-in-law. As you can see, the women on the right are quite upset. And I think one of the things you can take out of this from David is that it does not matter, even if you are our family, if you disrespect our government, you will die. And this is the oath that they've taken. Moving on to the Oath of Tennis Court, Jacques-Louis David becomes a bit of a different artist, as you can see just from this piece. This is just a study that he was doing after this Oath of Tennis Court, where he actually was part of this group of people who had come together to make some laws in a tennis court because they had been locked out of the legislative rooms of the king. And these people had come together to basically pay an oath that they would not disband until the Constitution was made and protected. And how they made this oath was in the form of the Hortai, his art. And so it's kind of interesting that he would, these people are taking an oath in the style of David's Hortai, and if you think about it, this is his painting, this is his art, which is imitating life, and it is. Let me just start. So this is David's painting of art that is imitating life, that is imitating his own art by giving this oath in the manner of the Hortai. So here we have it again, just the comparison side by side of both. And from this tennis court oath, Jacques was really just thrust into the revolution, and all hell was about to break loose with the death of Marat. Again, this is that activist, journalist who doesn't sound like he was a very good person. But this painting by Jacques-Louis David, in the month after his death, becomes the symbol of martyrdom of the revolution. It polarizes everybody, basically, because he was murdered by Charlotte Corday, who was an aristocrat who did not like his life, So moving on quickly, this is just a small piece by Jacques-Louis David of Marie Antoinette, obviously a peak of the revolution where they beheaded her, the queen, and have exiled her son. And in comes the man of the hour, Napoleon. So as we get into his piece, I just want everyone to remember that, we have just gone through this revolution. Jacques-Louis David, they've just gone through this. Who's to say that Napoleon is not very much like an overbearing aristocracy? He is out for himself. This is not someone who is of the people. This is not Robespierre, who is promising to drink the hemlock, This is Napoleon. So we'll learn that this piece and this projects that Jacques-Louis David, I should mention, he becomes appointed the first painter to Napoleon. And this piece here, he also has painted, scratched the Notorious B.I.G. Mace and Puff Daddy lyrics on there. So, the coronation. Getting into some of the formal elements, as I said in the beginning, we have Napoleon crowning himself here, and then also his Empress, Josephine, in front of Pius VII. And this was absolutely a sign of rebellion and a sign that Rome would never rule him as he crowns himself. They chose this to be more of a benevolent pose than the next, which you will see, which was the original piece by Jacques-Louis David depicting Napoleon crowning himself and the Pope kind of sitting behind him as a bit of a dunce. So to kind of smooth Napoleon's rough sides a bit, they decided to just paint him as crowning Josephine versus just himself. As we get back through, you can see, he blends in, but the Pope originally, as he crowns himself, is sitting and not looking very pleased, as he wouldn't be because he has just lost power. But in the proper propaganda, as art could be used for back then, Napoleon changes his mind and says, no, we will have him anoint this union and then gain even more power by having the Pope back it, even if he didn't. Moving along the horizontal axis, as they normally do in neoclassical art, we get to Empress Josephine and her ladies-in-waiting in her massive cloak, which they said this cloak weighs like 80 pounds, which I can't imagine. So what's happening here is he has painted her in such a wonderful way. He's such a gentleman. As you move through the next slide, You see here his original study of Josephine, and she was in her 40s when she was being crowned empress. She was a widow and had some other children, and this was kind of a later thing in her life. And plus, taking over the world takes time. So, like a great artist, did a little Photoshop in here and tightened up her hairdo a bit, brought out some of the heaviness in her cheeks and under her chin, and lined her up a bit more, as you see in the final piece. It's a close-up. One of the things about this painting is it's so stinking big. All you want to do is get your nose right up into it and see all this detail, and you just can't because it's so big and there's so many people, at least at the one in Versailles. Another thing, a little detail, this is Jacques-Louis David. He actually painted himself into the painting. Another person depicted is his mother, who in fact is another little addition. She was not at the coronation. She did not approve of it. She didn't approve of this union because Napoleon was in the middle of a huge fight with his brothers, who are next. Here are his brothers, who were actually also not at the coronation because of this argument. To their right are his sisters and his stepdaughter Hortense and her son, there they are, and her son Napoleon Charles Bonaparte. Hortense, his stepdaughter, the daughter of Empress Josephine, married Napoleon's brother. It was said that the sisters really did not like Josephine for whatever reason. Jealous, I suppose. Here's just an idea of how big this piece is. And I'll also just add that this is, if you notice anything different, this is the piece that is currently in Versailles. This is the one that I saw. What's crazy about this is a duplication. So, Jacques-Louis David was first painted to Napoleon. Well, what happened is the king came back, took over, exiled Napoleon to his island somewhere, and came in and really should have killed Jacques-Louis David as well, but he pardons him, and he says, you know what, you can stay. Jacques-Louis David, being the proper French man that he is, he goes to jail, he comes out, he's fairly reformed in a way, but he says no. He exiles himself to Brussels, basically, and he runs into some American entrepreneurs who say, hey, well, you gotta repaint that painting. So he does, and if you notice any differences, he paints Napoleon's favorite sister on the far left in pink. Pretty cool, right? So another thing that stands out with this painting is so much of this painting and the build-up to this painting has come from a revolution, right? So when I first saw it, I'm like, what is this painting doing in Versailles? So we'll go to the next slide. This is Versailles. Like, it could not be more Rococo, right? This is grandeur. This is as fancy as it gets. Everything is gold, right? Here's the hall again. Beautiful. So what is this painting of Revolution doing in Versailles? This was my question. Because it seems like, what a rebellious piece. Not only is it a break from the late Baroque style of the Rococo movement, but it's also a total, like, from Baroque to Neoclassicism is just a huge jump. Like, what is it doing in here? It seems like a bit of a slap in the face, and I was wondering if possibly he put this in there on purpose, but I guess we'll never know. Here's a side-by-side depiction of the sisters. So the one on the right is in Versailles. That's the remake. By the way, he painted this from memory. Crazy, right? And they say that this is the only difference, but just from this little blip, you can actually see that in the background behind the sisters, the original men are much older, and look, he gives them another little Photoshop boost to the new one and paints them as young men again. Gentleman, a scholar. So there you have it. Here's the formal elements again. So from Neoclassicism, you always have everyone, there's a beam of light coming from the top left corner down to Napoleon. He is the focus of this piece. He, the Pope, and Josephine are the brightest figures in this piece. The horizontal elements would include Pope Pius VII going over to Josephine. You can see his eye angle. And then the vertical elements are the cross coming up and over to the mother, probably the second most important person here, and all the way over to the sisters. It brings you all together. And then everyone's looking at Napoleon. Everyone is facing in. Every eye is on this coronation, just as Napoleon would have it. And I know we've kind of named a few of the people that were in this coronation, but just so you know, every single person here came in to Jacques Louis David's studio to have their portrait done for this commissioned painting, because it was all paid for by the people of this royal court. No pressure, right? So there he is, Jacques Louis David, one of the most ambitious painters of his time when it came to trying to marry philosophy with craft. He lived through some of the most tumultuous times of history of Europe. He was one of the revolutionaries that came to defy the king and the era of decadence and ineptitude known as the Rococo movement. He's one of those artists that changed everything and was a key player in the history of Europe. From the Rococo era and its late Baroque style of grandeur to this neoclassicism revolutionary period and the shift of thinking about the rule of Rome and the separation of the church, there was David. He was the one in the middle of it all, the true embodiment of his philosopher king. He probably doesn't get the rap that he deserves. He didn't drink the hemlock with Robespierre, and he's not Marat and the true, embodiment of the revolution. But he did commit his entire life to what he thought was right and good. I can't imagine that it was easy for him, wearing all these different hats. But I'm sure glad that he did, because without him, I don't think that this world, or even the French Revolution, I don't think it would have progressed the way it did. Who knows where we'd be now? Through this project, I've definitely come to know that perhaps the coronation was not David's, grand piece. It was not something that he is super famous for as an artistic perspective. But through this process of learning about the coronation and going back and spending time to discover who Jacques Louis David is, has been quite an adventure. Something that I guess I'm just going to have to kind of force in here is just this idea that I wanted to mix in somewhere, but it doesn't really fit with the narration earlier. It's the concept of vanitas, which is described as a category of symbolic works of art, especially those associated with the still life paintings of the 16th and 17th centuries. It depicts the inevitability of death and the impermanence of these earthly things. And I just love that. I feel like this kind of can apply here, because here's a piece that he's worked so hard and persisted through such opposition to create a piece for yet another king. There's something glorious and temporary about it. And him. Almost seems like he knew what he was doing. So that's it. That's my final. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry it's much longer than the 10 minutes. But I got wrapped up in this, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.